In this video, we are going to talk about the next part of type of matrix, which is known as REF, row echelon form, and RREF, reduced row echelon form. So this form will usually be used later during our process of we have another process of doing something in matrix that will need for us to refer to this form. Okay, so for it to be called a row echelon form, it need to consist of these three properties. As for RREF, it need to follow these four properties, but actually RREF is an extended version of REF, so they will be having the same first three characteristics. The last one will be an additional characteristic for RREF. I will just talk about the characteristic first, and later I'm going to give you a kind of guideline on how to easily determine whether it is a row echelon form or reduced row echelon form. Okay, by using a book definition, okay, an REF is actually a metric that if any rows that consisting entirely zeros, they are talking about the rows, right? If any rows consisting entirely zero, it should occur at the bottom of the matrix. So if you look at this, it has a row that actually consists of entirely zero, which is this one. However, it did not appear at the bottom of the matrix, so it is actually in the middle. And if you look at the bottom of the matrix, they still have a column with value other than 0. So this one is actually already violate the first one. As for the second one here, it did not contain any row that consists of entirely 0, so that is not the issue. We don't need to apply the first characteristic. If there's a column with entirely 0, it should appear at the bottom of the matrix. Then for the second one, so basically, for the first one, for the first characteristic, A is already being violated. As for B, we are still able to proceed with the second and third characteristic because there's no entirely zero columns here. So, okay, for each row that does not consist entirely zero, the first non-zero entry is 1, or called a leading one. In other words, the leading diagonal. Okay. So for a rows that is actually not entirely zero, the first entry of a diagonal, the first diagonal entry should be 1, like this one. So this is the diagonal element, right? So it start with 1, it start with 1, it start with 1, right? So okay, so for the second characteristic, B is still checked. For each non-zero row, the value, the number 1 appears to the right of the leading one of the previous row. Meaning, for this one, right, this is the first one for the first row. For the second one, it should appear to the right. It cannot appear to the left. So it should appear to the right. So it should have this kind of form for it to be considered a row echelon form. Okay, the easier way to actually identify whether it's a row echelon form or not, it is by understanding the name itself. Echelon, if you try to Google it, is actually being defined as a stage, a level. So we can imagine it like a stair, right? A stair. So if that metric able to form a stair of 1, that there is a possibility that it's a row echelon form. If you look at this, if there's an entirely zero rows in the middle, it cannot actually form a stair. So it can't be row echelon form. The same goes if the leading one appear to the left of the number 1 here. So basically it should appear to the right, right? So if just imagine if this one, the number 1 here appear to the left, it can't be the echelon. It can be form a stair, right? So that is how you look at it to determine the row echelon form. Let's try to apply it. For this one, just by looking at this, right, we can't see the echelon, right? Because the entirely zero rows in the middle blocking the echelon. So this is not REF, row echelon form. As for this one, let's see. We have this, okay, but now the echelon did form, but the second one here is not leading one, so it is not a row echelon form. So next, let's look at the RREF, an extended version of REF, where they share the same characteristic for the first three, but the last one, this is what makes it as a different as RREF. So in a situation where now that let's say you have passed the first three, that makes that metric REF. The next to determine whether it is an REF or maybe RREF is actually depending on the last characteristic here. If a column, now for the first three we are talking about rows. Now for the last one, the characteristic that determine RREF, it looking at the columns, right, which is this way. So if the column contains leading one, then all other entry is 0. So if you look at this, you'll see that, okay, at first we know that there's an echelon, okay, with total entirely 0 rows at the end. This is actually indicate it is REF at first. Then we'll check on the leading one for each column for the leading one, okay. The other value for the other element in the columns other than leading one is 0. This is what indicate that this is actually not just REF, it is RREF, reduced row echelon form. Now let's look for B. We see the echelon or the stage or the stair, and let's try, this is actually indicate this is a REF at first. Let's see whether it is just REF or can be extended to RREF. Look at the column that contain leading one. Okay, we have 1 as a leading one and others as 0. So basically this is also an RREF. Okay, so now let's try to look at the exercise a bit. See, just look at it at a glance. Can you form an echelon or a stair using this one? No, right? The leading one is start from here and then to the left and then to the right. That is not an REF or RREF, right? So for B, okay, for B, we can form an echelon. We have the stair here, right? But then it is REF at first. Now let's check whether it is REF or RREF. So you will look at this leading one. Okay, other element is 0, so check. Now look at this leading one. Other element, okay, there is one non-zero value here, which is 5. So basically for this one, this is not at all RREF or REF. As for this one, this is just an REF but not RREF, right? That is how you determine REF and RREF. Okay, now let's we have several more types to go. Okay, I will wrap it up in the next video. Hopefully that will be the last video for type of matrix before we proceed to another subtopic. Okay, thank you.